For every human on this planet in some way, shape, or form, grief is the way.
Grief hasn't been the present emotion, but it's still underlying. A big part of me doesn't want to forget about it. Not necessarily the process of being in it, but what it brought into my life.
I think death might be the most fair thing, which is really tough because we're still here.
To know that the grief doorway was right in front of you. What was that process, that experience to step into that door?
I think it was Andrew Garfield said, grief is just love unexpressed. Grief is not this punishment, but rather a celebration of the love that we got to experience.
Anger ran a lot of my process of grief, that uncomfortable reality of actually being human.
Anger, I don't personally think is a negative emotion. I think it's a very healthy emotion. When it gets repressed, get out of the way, because then it just explodes. If we don't let it out, it seeps out, and it seeps onto people we love, and then we feel bad. That's where shame comes in.
Aloha, and welcome to another episode of the Embracing Human podcast.
Before we begin the next episode, I'd like to take a quick moment to ask for your support in helping us grow our podcast.
Take a moment to like, subscribe, or follow on whatever platform you're watching this on.
Your engagement helps us to grow our platform as well as allows us to invite even more interesting interviews in the future. I hope you enjoy the following episode and wish that you gain insight, clarity, or knowledge about what it means for you to embrace being human.
Welcome to another episode of the Embracing Human podcast. I am Leo, and I have my brother Scott here. And on today's episode, we are going to be going rather deeper into a theme, a portal that initiated our brotherhood, our connection, our presence, and all that is now currently unfolding in our lives in many ways. And that portal is grief. We've shared a handful of times going, deep here and there with what grief has brought into our lives in the stories we've shared in recent and upcoming episodes. But I felt inspired to have a more in-depth conversation around what grief actually means for us as individuals who were deeply in it, and what that process was like in terms of stepping into that portal that was so deeply unknown, to navigating it, to what worked, what didn't, and ultimately how grief got us here in this moment. We didn't really take some time to break down what this would look like, but I really felt, considering all the things that have been happening in our lives recently, grief hasn't been the present emotion, but it's still underlying. A big part of me doesn't want to forget about it. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily the process of being in it, but what it brought into my life and what it continues to bring into my life. The reminder of loss and change. So when I bring up the term grief and the portal that we've shared together, is there anything that initially comes alive in you that you'd like to speak on, share, or discuss?
One is what you just mentioned about not wanting to forget about it. I think this is an important thing around grief that's not really well understood or discussed, is oftentimes when we witness someone else in their grief, we're like, well, don't bring it up because we don't want to stir up their emotions, which is interesting because in my grief, oddly enough, when I was deep in it, the only thing I wanted to talk about was Chester and my grief. I wanted the space to really feel and to be witnessed in it. And so I think there's something to this practice of grief. I think it was Andrew Garfield said, grief is just love unexpressed. Mm-hmm. So this reminder that grief is not this punishment, but rather a celebration of the love that we got to experience. So that was the first thing that came up. The second one, I was thinking back, this was earlier today in preparation for this, I was just thinking about grief and death and how it meets us. And we had multiple, but one that stood out this morning, one distinct difference was that the way in which your mom's and my dog's passing occurred were different. I spent a year preparing for Chester's death, which in a way is kind of odd because it's almost like I thought I was in control of it, whereas yours took you by a complete surprise. And so the word that came up was shock. Mm-hmm. in that your mom's passing shocked you because you didn't see it coming at all.
Yeah.
And Chester's death shocked me because I didn't think it was possible. My judgment towards myself would be like, a lot of people are like, duh, bro, everybody fucking dies. But in the impermanence of life and the day-to-day and the way the ego works, we really don't think it's coming for us. Like it's impossible to actually happen, and then it does. And that's the shock that I experienced, was not even necessarily the day after he was put down, but weeks after. I was like, I kept being like slapped in the face of like, one day everything was different and there was nothing I could do about it. Mm-hmm. Or at least there was one major distinct difference and there was no going back. And that was kind of the like this grappling I had with life, that I really had it, that life was very unfair. And it was in going through the grieving process over the past year and a half-ish now, is that I think death might be the most fair thing, which is really tough because we're still here. Mm-hmm. You know, like they're off in bliss and party, or maybe they're back here again. Who knows? We don't really know. But we're still in this cyclical suffering of the ego and the mind construct. And so it's like, what the heck? Like, this is fucking bullshit, you know? Mm-hmm. And so the thing that kind of came up was like the upheaval of emotion that this grieving like kind of brought up, was like, wow, I thought I was on the path. And I was, and wow, I was oblivious to so much. Mm-hmm. And so there's a opportunity, I think, that arose for us to speak on our grief and our process. Not like it's the way. It was our way for sure. Yeah. But for every human on this planet in some way, shape, or form, grief is the way. It's all around us. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's less about advice and it's more about normalization. Of like, we all go through this, and it's okay, and it hurts, and it's normal, and it's very natural, and to just to normalize it so other people can feel like they can embrace their grief and find support. Because I've met a lot of people who have had a significant passing in their life, and they didn't grieve. Mm-hmm. And I personally, for myself, I don't know if I had a choice. It was so abundantly clear I had to grieve, or I would be in a different world of self-soothing and hurt and addiction. And so, I think that's my commitment, is in the sharing of my process, is to really remove the shame of it all, you know, and come back to the love of like, God, I love that dog so much and myself. I loved myself so much to let myself be sad. Incredibly sad, completely fall apart alongside you. And I was talking to Danielle about it last night, about how we've all cried a lot in this house over the past year. I cried with her, she cried with me, we cried together, we cried with Kuya, we cried in each other's arms, we cried on that couch, we cried in the garage, we cried in my room, we cried, like, we have all cried a lot. And how beautiful it's been that we've had this container to do so. Because I really do believe it's uncommon, but God, what a gift. What a gift. And so I'm excited to see where this conversation goes. That's part of our willingness in this, to give kind of a real, authentic view into our lives, is to just see what happens.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons that I had to adapt to is that grief is fucking uncomfortable. And I don't think there really is anything that compares to the uncomfortability of what grief brings into your life. To be felt, to be seen, to be thought. And it never seems to get that much easier as time goes on. And I think that's also, like you said, part of the reason why this conversation feels so important, is because it is very uncommon. The topic of grief, the expression of grief, the reality of grief, it's so taboo. It's so disruptive. We live in a society and a culture that is desperate to have such a perfect life to be presented and lived. And it's so clear on social media and the facade. But when reality hits, such as grief, in the middle of, a corporate office or in the middle of your vacation, like it grief halts you in your place, and it's not easy. And that's, I think, why so many of us are so scared to talk about it, because it's not something that is ever mastered by anybody. It humbles you, and I think the point is to humble you to a degree of acknowledging that you don't have control of this. You don't have control of a lot of things in life, and this is a stark, heavy, punishing reminder in many ways of that. A question that came up for me is you're never prepared for grief, for one. And so I'm curious of what comes up and out of you when to hear your experience of essentially you had a year of understanding that departure was around the corner. And so as a brother and as a man, knowing that reality is around the corner and acknowledging that that's something that's very foreign, because I think which is why this rocked us so hard at the same time. It's not that we haven't lost people in our lives. It's that we've lost probably the closest person we've ever lost in our life thus far. And so I'm curious, like, yes, it was a shock for me, completely unprepared. Yes, we've had talks about what life could be like once something like that happens, but never was I ever prepared for the suddenness of it. But for you, I'm curious as well, like with this energy and lesson and true human experience of grief, as someone like me who's never really walked in the depths of that, what was that like for you? To know that the grief doorway was right in front of you. What was that process, that experience to step into that door?
It's interesting how it all unfolded, especially because I maybe a year or two before, I made the conscious choice to start documenting my life. I have hundreds of videos documenting that year. And so there are many videos where I would do breath work and Chester would just lay next to me and I would be bawling at the realization that like this was coming. So I had started grieving well before his death because I could see like he stopped going up and down stairs and he stopped eating certain types of food and he couldn't walk as far and as fast. We went from walking around the city to walking around my neighborhood to walking around the block. So I had some like really clear indicators that he was going downhill. But kudos to life in that I never really prepared for his death. What I did was I chose to live with him. And so from December to May or June of 2020, December 2022 to June of 2023, we went on a 6-month road trip all across the country. We went to Phoenix and we drove from Ohio to Phoenix and then up to California and then, went all over Salt Lake and Palm Springs and New Mexico and all this stuff, Colorado. And the thing I said was I took a year off to walk my dog home. And I'm so blessed, one, that I had the space to do that and the permission that I gave myself to do that more so. But this like the regret that still came afterwards of like I could have spent more time with him. We could have been closer. We could have all that. And I was like, but buddy, do you see what we did? We went to the petrified forest and we went to, like we did all this stuff. We peed on the world's largest mailbox, like all this stuff, like random shit. Because I knew the impermanence of life. I mean, I could say it was because I knew he was going to die, but I think it was more so because I knew how much I was going to miss him. That I wanted all these memories to be like, I'm going to make as many memories with you as I can. And if there's anything I would want people to hear, it's that is live for today. Celebrate the love that's already there versus hoping it'll look different. And I think the other thing that I would tip my hat towards life for was that for whatever reason, I like got into real therapy and I had support. That was the other thing is I had support from a therapist and from close friends to like navigate this. And then very shortly after I found myself here, it was really interesting because even in the midst of it, it wasn't like, oh, my dog's going to die. It was like, oh, my dog can still go on hikes. It was, I can still feed him ice cream and he doesn't shit himself. Like it was these little celebrations of what I had.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is, for me, what I would celebrate in the preemptiveness of what was coming was just, I chose to live, and I think that's been a big lesson moving forward is I want to live my life for today, not for tomorrow. And I don't have a big, like, I could put my parents in that place now. Like, well, but it really, the lesson it taught me was me, my own impermanence and my own like mortality of like, what do I want to be able to look back and say I did for myself? I don't know. Like it was such a, like just looking back on it, I'm shocked that I gave myself permission to do that because I just like look back in my memory and see myself walking through parks in the middle of the day. Like, I couldn't have done that if I hadn't left corporate America years before.
Yep.
And I'm still kind of shocked that I let myself do that. It's probably one of the greatest gifts I've ever given myself was to pause, both before and after, especially after, but really before too. I think had I not paused before, the after would have been way worse, like way harder. Because I think there would have been a lot more guilt. I don't even know how to like summarize it. It was just something that kind of organically happened. And if anything, what I hope is that it inspires people to look at the lives or to look at the relationships in their life that mean the most to them. Say if this were to go away today, would I be okay with that? And anywhere it's like, no, do something about that.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes it is that.
Yep.
As you experience, like it was just gone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say you couldn't have conversations with your mom after she passed. You surely did. But I'm sure there's parts of you that wishes you could have said things in person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious for you, did you ever fathom something like that could happen? And how were you with yourself in the process of it happening?
Initially, and if I was to be honest, I couldn't ever comprehend what it would mean to navigate a parent's death. There was no way, shape, or form I was prepared in any way, emotionally, physically, spiritually. I know my mom was navigating health stuff for a couple years, but never was there like this, like a dark cloud, the potential. And maybe there was, and I just wasn't willing to accept that. I think there was a part of me that did sense some intuition of concern, but didn't know what to do with that. And I also think I come from a family experience of like, you don't want to project worry out there. It creates more stress. So you try to be strong. So yeah, I didn't feel in any way prepared for it. It was definitely an extreme shock. And sometimes I wallow back and forth of feeling like I didn't get closure. That last conversation, the last goodbye, the acknowledgement of it all, the last words. All I have left is of my mom's voice is the voicemail I got right before I flew out, right before she went into emergency surgery. And that's what I resort back to hear and feel my mom again if I have a hard time connecting with her. But like, I think death in general was still very new for me in my world. 3 months after Zen was born, his mom, or Zen's grandmother, passed away from ovarian cancer. And in that moment, I actually got to be in her deathbed with her and have a conversation. Or even though I wasn't there for the funeral because I had to come back for work, I got to have a degree of closure where she was conscious and aware enough to have a real conversation with me. Which was my first experience of death and grief from someone that I had impacted my life and that I looked as a mother figure. And that one was really difficult because I held a lot of guilt for having to leave, but she gave me this powerful blessing of like, it's time for you to go and go conquer your world with no more fear. And I just remember bawling in her bed, in her arms. And she's like, it's okay. It's going to be okay. The part that is beautiful about that, but one of the hardest part is I didn't get to do that with my own mom. And that was, if anything I could change, it would be to have that opportunity to hear that directly from my mom And I can see how that is also my mom spreading that message to me through her, in preparation for the fact that I didn't get to have a conversation with my mom. So in my mind, like, I got the message before it even happened. But the shock value to it was really difficult. And when it initially happened, I numbed. Like, I instantly numbed because I knew once the doctor came in and checked her pulse and was like, yeah, it's done. It was like my gears turned into survival. Like, okay, I know that behind the curtain, behind the veil, there's a million fucking things to do right now. And I don't even know where to begin or what it even is. But we're about to find out. And it's probably not going to be a fun process. And I felt like in that moment, a lot of that responsibility fell onto me because my dad also was in the complete unknown. But more than likely, I probably know more than he does in terms of like how to navigate it. Especially over the last couple of years when my mom was taking care of my dad. So I felt like I was stepping into her shoes now as the like caretaker of the family, which pushed all of the emotions to the side because I just wanted to get it done. Yeah, that was initially the start of my grief, is the shock.
There's something I want to circle back to because I could feel like a big, whether it's charge or just like desire to be witnessed in. Like, you talked about Zen's mom passing and you getting this experience with her and the regret that you have that you didn't get to do it with your mom. What would you ask her?
My mom?
Yeah, like if you had that opportunity to talk to her, what would you say?
The part of me that arises right now that comes up, which is probably what wouldn't come up in that moment, but was just this like this part of me that wants to tell her I don't know what I'm fucking doing, and I'm scared, and I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'm capable. I don't know what's best. Like, to just get that off. And I say the context to that because in that moment, the last thing I would want my mom to feel like is this fear of departing because her son's not ready for all that comes. Yeah. But from the context of being witnessed by my mom one last time, that's what comes up. What I would probably, in that moment, if I went back to my headspace of like trying to be strong, if I actually had a conversation with her where I knew it was the last one, I would just thank her for everything she did and trying so hard to make sure everyone was good and safe and that she did a good job. And to not worry about my dad or Danielle, because I energetically, that's always her priorities.
Yeah.
She was always knowing that I was good. I was super independent. But when it comes to my sister and my dad, it was like priority number 1 and 2. And I would just reassure her that we'd all be okay.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge like the emotion that arose in me as you said that, of like the thought of telling my mom that, like, oh, wow. Like, not even just the thought of telling my mom that, the thought of my mom actually passing, and to have that conversation, to choose to have that conversation, like, wow, gut wrenching. And I just so acknowledge your humanness in that, for even as you sit here today, what you would tell her and how different that would be if she was in the hospital, and how you would want to appear strong and together and like, I've got this, but internally being like, I don't got this, and it's so interesting because the other half of that question is what do you think she would say?
If I was sharing in the beginning, or sharing what I said in the beginning, she would tell me to shut up.
Yeah.
Or just tell me stop it.
Right. She'd tell you the truth.
Yeah. And she'd tell me that. She'd probably say something along the lines of like, it's probably going to be hard. Yeah. But anything new is hard. And you're going to be fine. That's probably what she would tell me if I was in the headspace of trying to be strong and telling her thank you. I could see her getting really emotional.
Yeah.
And I don't really know what she would say at that point with being in that headspace and that energy of being on your deathbed, knowing that this is the last opportunity for you to say whatever it is
Right.
you need to say. I really don't know, but I do know there will be I love yous and maybe even I'm sorry's. I think that's something I haven't really sat with to question because I feel like I'll never really know. And what feels more real to me is the conversations I actually get to have with her.
There's something about a radical level of presence where you can and I can connect to the other side and just being like, I'm here with you now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and even though in the physical form it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I don't see you. It's like that's not the point.
Yeah.
That's all just illusion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious on a different note and thread to pull on, because I could say the same for myself, and I'm curious what your experience was with this, because I've witnessed you over the past year and a half shift pretty much every area of your life.
Pretty much, yeah.
You were still a father before and after, but the way you fathered shifted a ton. You know, like you don't go to a job anymore. Like you were always present, I'm sure, but the level to which you spend time in that presence is like significantly more because of that decision to not go back to work. And your relationship ended and shifted and transitioned and transformed and all that. I'm curious what you would say, or if you would agree or not. The question is why do you think it took this to change all of this?
Well, I'm going to lean in initially, just being humble, because to acknowledge that I don't initially know why it took this, and what I do acknowledge is it almost was meant to be this way. The timing, I don't know if I'd be able to redo my life the way I had the opportunity to over the last year and a half anywhere in my past with the type of focus, presence, and surrender. I think it was grief that pushed me to a level of surrender that initiated the shifts and the changes, as opposed to control of trying to keep it all together. Yeah, it's tough to answer that because leading up to my mom's passing, that's basically where I was at in my life, was just trying to hold everything together, waiting for bricks to fall to like run over there and catch it and put it back and then keep circling the foundation, and just really not having strong enough cement or plaster or something to actually hold it all together. But I had the illusion that I did. It took my mom's passing for every facet of my life to be looked at the least. And because I was in the headspace I was in, the anger, the resentment, the frustration, even the victimization of it all, it was like, what do I have to do in my life initially? What do I have to do in my life to not ever feel this again? Which is abandonment, which is lack of closure, lack of being respected and heard, like all of these things that snowballed into from blind spots to like spotlights. Like, you need to look at this because it needs to change thanks to your mom. And so the short answer is I think it was meant to be when it was meant to be.
So if I were to ask myself the same question, why did it take Chester's death for me to grow, to transform? What came through was one sentence: because I wanted to be a fucking boy. I had yet to have something so radically paradigm shifting and earth shattering to like just bring me to my knees, to be like, you can't keep living like this.
Like Peter Pan?
Yeah, like it was just so, what do you mean? Like what, like it was just so confusing. And it took something on that level to be like, grow up, bro. Because there were still parts of my life that I wanted to be righteous about and that I wanted to be right about and that I wanted to like, I don't care. I'm not going to take responsibility for that. I'll just kind of look like I do. And it was like, dude, you can't do that. I choose not to live in a flippant way anymore, where for a lot of my life, I didn't really care if I was hurting people. I didn't really care if I didn't have any repercussion. People hurt me, fuck you. Tit for tat. It's how life works. And it was very like toxic. And it took something like that to catalyze all the areas. And it didn't mean I wasn't doing any work. I was doing an enormous amount of inner work. But it took something like Chester passing to cement it all as real. And I said in a previous podcast, like I became a man the day Chester died as I transitioned him, you know, like I did that. It put to bed a lot of these boyish tendencies to not take accountability, to not walk in integrity, to not do the loving thing. And it was like, we're not doing that anymore, you know, and it's somewhat hard to admit that I felt so childish, not necessarily in that time in my life, but earlier in my life. And those parts were still there. They had not been held. They had not cried. They had not emoted the heaviness that they were carrying and the chip on their shoulder to being like, I don't care. And so when Chester died, it was like universal permission to feel whatever I needed to feel and to cry and to be angry. And I was watching a video a couple days ago. I was in here. This was October. It's like October 27th or something. And I was like dancing in this part of the room in front of the cold plunge just to move this energy through my body. I was just like ecstatically flailing around. And then all of a sudden the green couch was right here. And I just start smashing the green couch as hard as I can. Like just over and over and over for probably a minute straight. And then I just start bawling, like just agony, like just pure agony. And I had so much compassion for myself of like, oh, buddy, like, God, that was horrible. You know, like, and it makes perfect sense why I was smoking a ton of weed and why I was doing whatever I was doing to just get to the next day.
Yep.
And, you know, I can look back on that a year later, year plus later and being like, wow, thank God I gave myself permission to do that. Or I'd probably still be doing some stuff like that. Or I'd still be feeling some of those ways. And I guess I share all that because I want to normalize that. And we've kind of talked about this recently, a couple days ago even, like, what if all the things we picked up weren't the answer? Then what? You know, it's like, well, God, you know, but there's something to that of like, I didn't read it anywhere in any book to like jump around and dance and smash things on furniture to feel something. It was what my body innately was like, do this, move your body, smash this couch, yell into this pillow, cry. And it soothes me in a way to being like, wow, I really didn't have to buy a course or attend a retreat or listen to that podcast. I just had to sit with myself and just be there and be like, what are you feeling, buddy? And he was like, oh, you actually give a shit? You actually want to listen? Okay, I'll tell you. And it's like,
yeah.
But I think that's something that we both kind of fell into the void in, is there was no manual.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're going to make one. You know, I think we might hold a space where someone else might make one, but I don't know if that's our karma. But what I do believe might be our karma is to create this space and the circle for other people to be like, wow, thank you for bringing light to this because I'm in it right now. I literally got a text from a guy last night. It was like, I'm preparing for my mom to die. End of life care. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, dude. Like, that's got to be so hard. I can't imagine. To just give him a space to be witnessed for a couple seconds, you know? I feel like, you know, we've talked a lot about the witnessing and how powerful and potent it is to just see someone in their process. I think that's one of the things that I can confidently look back and be like, wow, we did a really good job of that. Like, we just, and it wasn't intentional. It wasn't to monetize. It was just like, you got 5 minutes, bro? You know, like, what are you doing tonight? I'm really glad I've got a lot of videos of us doing that. Breath work and kava and sitting in this garage rolling on massage balls and hiking into Eao, just like random stuff of like, wow, we really did it. We really did it, you know, and we still are doing it. It's not this thing that goes away. And like you said, you were like, it doesn't get easier. And I was like, I don't like that. And then I was like, no, that's true. It doesn't get easier. What happens is we get distracted easier. We forget more. And then all of a sudden one day we're driving and we hear that song and we're like, oh, damn it, I thought I forgot. It's like, thank God I didn't forget though, you know? And it's this beautiful dance from life of like really tenderly showing us how much we care, you know? And like sharing that with the world.
Yeah.
Life, like death, grief didn't harden me. I find a lot of, dare I say, pride and being like, something really hard happened and I didn't let it harden me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like that to me is a really good win.
100%. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that. What came up for me is your ownership of basically your inner boy identity in many ways being fully exposed. And what came up for me as you were sharing that was like, oh yeah, it's grief is an initiation. And whether it be the version of you that also needs to depart in order for the next phase, because there's grief in that. And I can see how that influenced your own process of your grief and what came up. It's pretty profound. And initiations aren't meant to be easy, nor are they meant to be comfortable. And grief as an initiation is the muckiest of the muck that I have personally experienced so far. And one thing that came up for me within the grief process early on was the experience of deep anger. And I'm curious to have a little conversation about anger from our personal experiences and as men, and the relationship to anger as men as a collective, and the way society views anger, and just remembering how angry I was in my process. And a lot of the anger tailed to the hard acceptance of how unhappy I was in my life even prior to my mom passing, and how hard it was to face that after my mom passed. And then having the opportunity to transform all of that. But in order for me to even begin the process of transforming all of that, I clearly needed to be angry at myself. I was angry at my mom. I was angry at my ex for adding to the abandonment experience of losing my mom, and feeling very alone in the suffering, which was just the perfect equation for anger to stew, to erupt, to be exposed. And anger ran a lot of my process of grief for the larger half of my experience when my mom first passed, as well as getting to witness your versions of anger. And anger is another topic, as is grief, that isn't something commonly talked about. And I think it's probably because of it being so connected to grief in many ways too. That uncomfortable reality of actually being human. And maybe the anger stemmed in the reality check of like, we only have finite time here. The anger stems from really not being able to really know what the fuck to do throughout the whole process. Who knows? But I'm curious on your anger that came up and how that healed you, as well as brought a lot of pain to the grief.
That's a great question. And a topic that so needs more light shine on it. You know, like I loved what you said earlier about going from blind spots to spotlights.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about a podcast title, episode title. Like for me, anger had been there for decades, for my childhood, for a number of different reasons, abuse. And to go there and be like, F this, you know, like this is some bullshit. You know, like my dog was healthy and then he was dead. Like, and granted, there was a lot of self-hatred of like, anytime I wanted to be like, well, he could still be here. And then this part would come and be like, but you put him down. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, oh God, like that guy is coming with a vengeance. Because Chester was also in a way the block between me and really fully reconciling the rest of my pain. Because I didn't have to look. Oh, I don't feel worthy. I don't feel good enough. I don't feel important. I don't feel like I matter. I don't feel significant. Just go walk my dog. Mm-hmm. Every day, someone would be like, that's the most beautiful dog I've ever seen. He's so well behaved. Oh my God. So much significance. Oh, great. I feel good again. Mm-hmm. So, okay. And then he was gone, right? And so then I'd go on a walk and no one would say a thing. And I would be like, why is this so upsetting? And it was like, well, I don't think anything of myself. So if they don't, I don't even exist now. There was like a deep existential crisis I went on early on in the grieving period, especially coming to Hawaii, where I'm in the middle of paradise, but I don't exist, because we were so deep in our own processes and when whatnot unfolding, like we didn't spend a whole lot of time together. Even still kind of, we don't. We kind of do, but we kind of don't. And so being on this like deserted island in the middle of the Pacific is like, find yourself. And you said it one day, you're like, yeah, Hawaii's kind of interesting in that regard. Like you're in the most alone place in the world, just the way it's built, but it's also the best place to find yourself. And I was like, that didn't help. Like, that's not cool. But it's true. Like people have a lot of established communities here. And like, unless you can really kind of like put yourself out there, it's a very lonely place or confronting, and it really gave me an opportunity to kind of sit in that and be like, okay, before I got Luce, it was like, how is this? Because I don't want to do that again. And it brought a lot of anger up, especially around this idea of life being unfair. Of like, why do I feel like I don't get what I want? I don't get what I deserve, and I can't have all these things, and blah, blah, blah. And it was that little boy who just needed to be held, who wanted to be held, and being like, kick and scream, bro. Tantrum, get mad, throw something. Because anger not dealt with turns to rage.
Yep.
And that's where violence comes in. Anger, I don't personally think is a negative emotion. I think it's a very healthy emotion. When it gets repressed, get out of the way, because then it just explodes. If we don't let it out, it seeps out, and it seeps onto people we love, and then we feel bad. That's where shame comes in. And then we shut it down even more. And so a lot of different areas of my life allowed me to see how angry of a person I was. My relationship with Amber, my relationship with my business, finances, just like really wanting to not be responsible, wanting to blame life and be a victim and be pissed. And like, well, why isn't it different? Because it's not. Who's going to do anything about it? Nobody, unless it's me. And so that was a very confronting time, and still to this day can be. If I'm being brutally honest, like still I can get very upset of like, why is this happening? I really believe that it's allowed me to go deep into that feeling, specifically anger, because, I'm sure many of us have heard like anger is a secondary emotion to being hurt or scared. Yes. And it's still an emotion. It's still an energy signature in the body that's asking to be expressed as anger, not just tears. Because sometimes I can have a really big cry and still be really angry. But if I go beat on some pillows or some yoga bolsters or go throw boulders in the river, like just picking up as heaviest thing I can find, pushing against rocks and screaming, I feel like an idiot sometimes doing it. But my body is like, thank you for feeling this. I don't give a shit who's around. I just wanted you to feel this. Like I felt so silly on Saturday being like, we're going to be banging on bolsters and screaming in the garage. Okay. Like, what do you mean, okay? You're supposed to be like, I don't know, bro. I'm like, damn it, now I can do it. And I think there's something in that for especially for men, but so many for women too. There's so many women that are just so pissed and salty, and rightfully so, to being like, get angry. Let yourself be witnessed in your anger, especially the witnessing part of like, let someone else being like, I see you and I fucking love you. I don't care how much you want to scream, yell, throw stuff, break stuff. Do it. I love you in that. Because that's what we didn't get as children. We got angry and it was like, time out, abandonment, oh, shame, oh, violence, oh, spanking. And it's like, wait, so you're telling me that when I get like that, I can hit someone? Oh, no, just me because I'm the parent. Oh, so I got to go exploit people who are weaker than me? Like all that is just like such a mind fuck.
Yeah.
But I really do believe one of the biggest gifts that was given was like, sit with that anger. Sit with these emotions that we are told to not have. My latest one is not eating food, like fasting and sitting with boredom. Sitting with this like, I'm not hungry, but I don't know what to do. It's 10 o'clock last night, and I'm like, I've only eaten like pretty much one meal, if that really today. Not even really a full meal. But I feel like I'm supposed to eat. I'm supposed to eat. Because what am I going to do if I don't? Go to bed? God forbid I go to bed. And I'm not hungry.
Right.
But we've been so programmed, like, 3 squares a day, bro. And so just these odd feelings that we've never really been conditioned to be like, those are okay. Like boredom's allowed, shame's allowed, anger's allowed. It's like,
Mm.
you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Can I trust you? But
It's a trap.
right. And I'm really curious, some of the nuggets of wisdom and value that you've extracted that you've either already transferred to your son or that you know you will at some point.
It's a big question. First that comes up is modeling for him. It's okay to feel all the emotions. Supporting that in any way it comes up for him. It's not necessarily even something I feel like I'm teaching him, even though mainly that's the idea of it. It's such part of the human experience that it's not something that can be taught. Meaning like we're gonna take a class and that type of energy is his father. It's like showing him that there are ways to move through this. One thing that's definitely on my radar of what I'm focusing on, because I'm doing a lot of work with that within myself, is trusting and empowering your voice, showing and encouraging, is letting him answer questions for himself. So he has confidence in what he thinks himself and his own words, and to be able to utilize that even when it's uncomfortable. And the intention for me is that the hardest thing that we're taught through environment is asking for help. So I want to make sure that that's something that he doesn't have in his head, that asking for help is a negative thing, which would only lead him to the opportunity to be witnessed, to be fully seen. And I think those are some of the biggest things is what I've learned in grief of the human experience is the importance of our emotions, the importance of sitting with them, the importance of asking for support when stuck in them or feeling lost in them, and feeling safe and being witnessed are definitely some of the things that come up right away.
You're talking about this stuff to impart upon Zen.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I heard recently, so you said earlier, you're like, initiations aren't meant to be comfortable. And one of the things we've lost in society is the rite of passage.
Mm-hmm.
And grief is a rite of passage
Yes.
that does not necessarily come on your 18th birthday or when you start puberty or any of that. But I was listening to a podcast recently, and it talked about, as men, the rite of passage for men is about removing the idea of separation.
Mm-hmm.
Because as a man, it is in working together in community that we thrive.
Mm-hmm.
There's no lone wolf syndrome, right? Pack mentality is what actually moves us along as a human race. And so rites of initiation for men are designed to remove the separation of that and be like, we are a group.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not random to me that the grief initiation that we went through was that.
Yeah.
Of like, hey, bro, I can't do this alone.
Mm-hmm. And it's not meant to be done alone.
Or at least I don't want to, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's not meant to, let alone designed for. You know, like we've created the weirdest society in history that it's like, no, you're all by yourself. And it's like, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
And so kudos to you for listening to that call and answering it and all that's unfolded, because what we've now modeled for ourselves and therefore the world is that we don't do this alone. And in fact, doing it alone is excruciatingly painful. And I think there's something really profound in how much we've embraced that. You know, like you going out last night, and it's just me getting to witness your sister. Like she literally sat out on I was on a coaching call. She sat out in the living room the whole time. And I got the coaching call. She sits out there and eats dinner, and then starts crafting, and we make a video, and she writes this letter to Chad and reads it on the video so she can send it to Chad. Like it just and to have this really interesting experience where, and it plays into what you said earlier of like, why did it take it to get to this? So that you could see that you weren't meant to do it all by yourself. That it's not all up to Leo.
Yeah.
Because that is how it was. You mixed the cement, you built the building, and you made sure the building didn't crumble. Oh, P.S. You also have to raise your son, go to work, and do all this other stuff, you know? And it's like, you can't do that. And so, non-surprisingly, as this all crumbles in front of you, you have to ask for support, including caring for a sister, let alone a child, That's not your sole responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And to trust that she'll still thrive.
Yeah.
The other people care about her as much as they care about you, and I guess that for me is a really important part of this topic of grief is community, is to let ourselves be held by others in this process, to really hold the parts of us that might believe they don't care and let them be proved wrong or proved right. And that's where we come in, like it's such a necessary thing in the world right now, I believe, because of what's going on, is just to say like, hey, I'm here with you.
Yep.
And I also agree that we have an opportunity to continually check in on this stuff. See how is it going. And a couple days ago, I had a deep cry. And it was just like, oh yeah, those happen.
Yeah, those are the questions that I wanted to like go into as we journey along with the grief topic of like how now it surprises you. That whole aspect where it really doesn't get any easier. It does happen less, but when it happens, it's still just as potent,
Right.
and just as much as a surprise now than ever. So yeah, I think there's a lot of amazing conversations and shares with that of how it's showing up now. So
Yeah.
it's like a song or
Right.
a smell or whatever.
And the deeper we go into life and the more present we get, like I have a new dog now, or you're dating a woman who someday might want kids, So like this idea of it's not going anywhere. We're getting more and more reminders to be with the totality of life and allow it to be what it is.
Yep.
And for us to see if we're willing to be available for any feelings that come along with it. And then modeling that for other men and other parents and other partners, being like, hey, it's okay.
Right.
We're going to be okay. We are okay. Especially when we're not by ourselves in it, And so, yeah, I love the idea of continuing parts on this. I would love to invite our listenership into sharing their experiences with grief and their practices and their questions. Yeah. I really believe we're sharing this as a resource, as another story, and I want it to be that. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. Love to hear what grief has done for you and what your experience has been like, because it's ridiculous that we experience these things alone when everyone experiences it. So I'd love to hear what initiations you've experienced, what processes have presented itself to you, and what emotions have shown up. Yeah. Looking forward to it all.
Thanks, everybody.
Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the interview today. And if you haven't already done so, please like or follow us on whatever platform you're listening to, and let us know if you have any questions or comments or requests of future interviewees.
And we hope you find this inspiration, the clarity, and the direction to fully lean into being human, whatever that means for you. Aloha.